Part 14 of the Blue Review, Volume 1, Issue Number 3, edited by John Middleton Murry. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Italian Books by Sidney Waterlow. Why is writing, to say nothing of painting and music, dead in modern Italy? Here is an instructive incident. In a recent number of La Voce, there appeared a letter from a Mr. Gustavo Botta, accusing a journalist, Mr. Giuseppe Vanicola, of shameless plagiarism. Mr. Vanicola was said to have signed his name to a number of articles on such subjects as Cubism and Debussy's music, which were nothing but translations and compilations, clumsily made from the work of well-known French writers. The eye of Monsieur André Gide, the novelist, critic and dramatist, who happened to be passing through Florence at the moment, was caught by this letter. Dipping his pen in the acid of that refined irony which has won him so many admirers all over Europe, he wrote to the editor of La Voce in deprecation of Mr. Botta's outburst. What, he asked, was all this fuss about? The artistic relations between France and Italy have ever been of the most cordial. The Frenchmen from whom D'Annunzio deigns to borrow only feel themselves honoured. Recently, a sketch of his own was adopted by Mr. F.M. Martini for the Roman stage, without acknowledgment. Such incidents only foster international good feeling. No doubt, he added, the writers pillaged by Mr. Vanicola would join, if they knew of it, in protesting indignantly against Mr. Botta's attack. The letter, in short, was a model of discreet sarcasm. What followed is almost incredible. First, Mr. Botta retorts with lofty morality, explaining at immense length that it is not a question of the more or less gratification of the plagiarized, since something higher, the principle of literary honesty, is at stake, and giving in parallel columns chapter and verse for Mr. Vanicola's sins. At the same time appears a friend of the accused, a Mr. Giovanni Amendola, to thank Monsieur Gide publicly for his spirited defence of Mr. Botta's victim. Nor does the joke end here. Mr. Botta returns to the charge with a "nothing can alter the facts." Mr. Martini writes to say that Monsieur Gide is no gentleman, and that he himself is a gentleman. Didn't he, when his play was printed, give it a motto out of one of Monsieur Gide's works? And finally, Mr. Vanicola comes out with his defence, which is this: there are plagiarisms of the spirit far more immoral than any plagiarisms of the letter. I love life, and, in spite of painful adventures, life has not ceased to love me. My literary work has, for me, the importance of the flower which I put in my buttonhole. Mr. Vanicola, with his bad taste in buttonholes, may be left to the obscurity which is his due, but La Voce purports to be an advanced organ, and the controversy, however trifling, may help us to see why Italian literature is what it is today. The striking fact is the denseness of all the persons concerned, their entire lack of a sense of humour. Not one of them sees that Monsieur Gide is laughing at them. They are a pack of solemn children, egged on to absurdity by a clever, malicious grown-up. Then, their fundamental insincerity, both of word and act, is obvious. They cannot play fair, and they cannot speak except in the cadences of a hollow and insipid rhetoric. And lastly, it is only too true, there are plagiarisms of the spirit more immoral than any plagiarism of the letter. Most Italian novels and poems of the moment are plagiarisms, not wholesome and deliberate, but subtly, as if by some spiritual infusion, from French sources. The countrymen of Boccaccio, from whose wide humanity, from whose sensitiveness to the ludicrous, the beautiful and the terrible, all modern narrative art is descended, seem to have lost the power of contemplating life with sincerity and independence, at least as far as the reproduction of it in words is concerned. To begin with the question of humour, It is lack of humour which weighs down Mr. Virgilio Brocchi, author of L'Isola Sonante and I Sentieri della Vita, Milan, Fratelli Treves. Such a story, for instance, as that called La Buon Anima di Agnese, in which a widower, bereaved in the prime of his age and burdened with a pug-dog to which the excellent defunct had been devoted, believes that life must henceforth be forlorn and impracticable, the entertainments consisting in the gradual dissipation of this illusion, evidently requires the airiest and gayest of touches. But the climax, when the hero, his taste for independence recovered, begins to live again, and succeeds at one stroke in getting rid of the pug and avoiding a second marriage, is reached by a process of leaden prolixity, with every point hammered out in a frenzy of emphasis. This exaggerated emphasis seems, in fact, the only native thing that these Italian writers have about them. Take away their special bravura, the dreadful flourish of their rich, rank, pseudo-Ciceronian manner, and nothing remains but a little kernel of second-rate Parisian product. The very language has lost all raciness of idiomatic flavour. It would be interesting to inquire into the causes of this disease. Chief among them, no doubt, would have to be noted the extraordinary effectiveness of the forms of expression devised by the French genius, which, with their finality and logical clearness, have led most of the world captive. But a large part would also have to be assigned to the peculiar weaknesses of Italy, to her lack of any more than superficial unity, to the very richness and diversity of her dialects, and, in the last resort, to the uneasy self-consciousness which comes from a sense of political inferiority. Not only Italian fiction, but poetry too is touched with this deadly plagiarism of the spirit, of which it would be possible to discover the seeds even in the rugged Carducci, although he and his gentler successor at Bologna, Pascoli, to whom, along with Carducci, Professor Mignon devotes some well-informed pages in his Études de littérature italienne, Paris, Hachette, 3 francs 50, seems to belong to a nobler race than the writers of today, who, while struggling to assert their personality, remain, if they are anything, mere satellites of the coteries of Paris. Consider Mr. Francesco Chiesa, one of whose objects is said to be the preservation of the Italian tongue in its struggle against competitors in the Canton Ticino. If this is true, his Historie e Favole e Formigini, Genoa, are a curious, even a tragic comment on my remarks, for here we have a writer active on one side of a struggle between nationalities, yet drawing all his inspiration from the foreigner. Mr. Chiesa's stories are a hash of Renaissance fantasies, a hodgepodge of pagan myth, of Catholicism, and of romance, such as has often been served up, done to a turn by Anatole France, and seems scarcely worth doing again. Here the French influence is palpable, and receives no disguise from a style which is often praised as sober and incisive. But allowance must be made for Italian exaggeration. If there is sobriety, it is the sobriety of complete dullness. The simplicity of Mr. Chiesa's case is not typical, however. The disease of spiritual plagiarism usually runs into subtler shapes, which, though they are infinite, seem in Italy to have one common characteristic, an exuberance of convulsive agitation. This agitation is like that of a man in a fever of self-distrust, who knows that there is something wrong with him, and cannot quite make out what. He casts about frantically for some attitude which will bring him salvation, but the quest is always vain, because salvation cannot come by attitudes. It is sometimes as exaggerated hatred of the past, and sometimes as exaggerated love of the past, that this self-distrust appears. The former, as embodied in the Futurists, has won notoriety abroad, and is strong in Mr. Giovanni Papini's Un uomo finito, Florence, Libreria della Voce. The latter in a very different book, Mr. Antonio Beltramelli's Le Novelle della Guerra, Milan, Fratelli Treves. Both spring from the same bitter root, that mood of exasperation and disillusionment which harps on the degradation of an Italy treated as an old curiosity shop, a villeggiatura for the idle rich of Europe, a streetwalker among the nations, and which so strangely strikes the foreigner who admires the progress which she has made since 1870 and her great achievements in the sciences. There is indeed something strained and artificial about all the literatures of patriotic revival so fashionable just now. Not even the resources of M. Maurice Barréz's exquisite art can quite reconcile us to his glorification of the parish pump. That nations are to be saved by splitting into their component parts, each part a focus of the ancestral virtues that cling to the soil, is not very plausible at the best, and when the ideas of M. Barrés have been passed through the romantic Italian mind, and emerge exhausted of their content, and unadorned by any accomplishment of style, the result is not attractive. Both Mr. Papini and Mr. Beltramelli are furiously Pisani, the one of the grey-green Tuscan landscape, the other of the broad quiet spaces of the Romagna. Mr. Beltramelli is bellicose as well. He is a voice of that section of feeling, at present dominant, for which the return to ancestral virtue means a policy of military conquest. Imagine Mr. Kipling's imperial enthusiasm and ferocity against black men multiplied tenfold, with all the admirable realism left out, and the Latin ideal of glory substituted for the English ideal of the strong, silent, public schoolboy, and you have some idea of Mr. Beltramelli's sketches of the Tripolitan campaign, which he hails as the beginning, after an era of lethargy, of a new risorgimento. It is symptomatic that even the introduction to a new edition of the collection of Dalmatian popular ballads, which Niccolo Tomaseo published in 1841, Canti Illirici, Milan, Libreria Editrice Milanese, 1912, cannot refrain from dragging in the Libyan War as the resumption by Italy of her interrupted renovation. The fact is, megalomania is a stock result of neurotic self-consciousness. In the struggle to assert his personality, the patient jealously watches the actions of others in order to outdo them, and he has his eye on others, even in his abysses of despair. Thus, at every point on the scale, he is incurably imitative. He is unable, as the phrase is, to be himself. Mr. Papini's Un Uomo Finito is a complete anatomy of this morbid state, and therefore, though devoid of artistic merit, is a fascinating book. In language which is meant to be vigorous, but is merely turgid, he gives us, in the first person, the self-revelation of a man who is played out. The hero begins by hating society. He ransacks all departments of philosophy, scholarship, and culture. He burns with literary ambition. He founds a review. Then, ever unsatisfied, he dreams of omnipotence. He will impose his will on the world. He will be God. Failing in this enterprise, he sinks into decay, but in the end, he revives and declares that he still has unpleasant surprises in store for his enemies. I still have something to say, and time before me. In my house there is always white paper in abundance. May he live to cover many reams of this paper without misgivings. His book is a compendium of all the qualities characteristic of Italian literature today: absence of sense of humour, insincerity, inability to observe life at first hand, tasteless extravagance, and that submission to the influence of foreign culture which is none the less abject because combined with an angry desire to shake off the yoke. "Is it not possible," he cries at one moment, in the false frankness of his confessions, 1,000 times possible, that I am nothing but a frigid reader of books, always being warmed up at the fire of others? that I have mistaken the submissive grumbling of an ambitious soul for the bubbling of a vein that is quick to overflow, and to gush, to refresh the thirsty earth, and to mirror the sky. It is more than possible. It is certain. End of Part 14.